My beloved child, there is a reason you found this message today. Out of every story you could have heard, every voice you could have followed, your heart stopped here. That was not an accident. Some moments arrive quietly, yet they carry the power to change the way you understand everything that has been happening around you. For a long time, you believed that your future love story was delayed because of bad timing. You questioned yourself. You wondered if you had missed an opportunity that would never return. You watched doors close without understanding why they closed. You saw silence where you expected answers. You felt distance where you hoped for closeness. But there is a hidden chapter that has never been revealed. Tonight, that hidden chapter begins to open. Somewhere, a person whose heart has been slowly moving toward yours reached a moment that changed everything. It was not a loud moment. It was not a dramatic scene. It happened in the quiet space where truth always speaks the loudest. That person discovered something about you. Not a rumor. Not a mistake. Not something that pushed them away. They discovered something that completely changed the way they looked at their own life. What they found was not your appearance. It was not your success. It was not anything the world usually celebrates. They discovered your character. They discovered the way you continue to hope even after disappointment. They discovered the kindness you have shown when nobody was watching. They discovered the strength you carry behind your silent smile. They discovered that your heart has remained genuine in a world that often rewards pretending. And when they realized this, everything inside them became impossible to ignore. For the first time in a very long time, they looked at the relationship they were already in and asked themselves one difficult question. Am I living honestly? That question echoed through every conversation. Every promise. Every plan. Every ordinary day suddenly felt different. Because once someone sees what real peace looks like, pretending becomes exhausting. The truth has a remarkable way of making old chapters feel too small. You never asked anyone to compare themselves to you. You never tried to compete for someone's attention. You continued living your life. Yet your quiet example reached someone who needed it most. Sometimes the greatest influence is carried without a single conversation. You have been changing hearts without realizing it. That realization became impossible for them to escape. They began noticing things they had ignored for months. Conversations that once felt meaningful now sounded empty. Dreams they once shared no longer inspired them. Smiles became forced. Silence became louder. And every day, one simple thought returned again and again. There must be something more. They did not understand why this feeling appeared so suddenly. But heaven often begins with a whisper before anyone hears the full message. The discovery about you became that whisper. It was not because you were perfect. It was because you were real. The world has many impressive people. But authentic hearts are rare. That rarity has a way of awakening people who have been asleep inside their own lives. Imagine standing in a room where every light has been dim for years. You eventually believe that darkness is normal. Then one tiny window opens. Suddenly, everything changes. Not because the room became different. Because you finally saw it clearly. That is exactly what happened. Your life became that window. Not through effort. Not through performance. Simply through who you have become. While you wondered whether anyone noticed your quiet journey, someone was learning from it from a distance. Every difficult season you survived was preparing a story you never knew another heart would read. Every tear you chose not to explain. Every prayer whispered when nobody listened. Every decision to remain kind instead of bitter. Those moments built something invisible. Now that invisible strength has become visible to someone whose future is beginning to change. You may still be asking yourself, how could someone learn so much about me without me knowing? Life has mysterious ways of connecting stories. Sometimes a conversation reveals your name. Sometimes a mutual friend shares an unexpected memory. Sometimes a simple act of kindness reaches people far beyond the moment itself. Sometimes the smallest choices travel farther than the loudest announcements. That is why nothing good is ever wasted. Not one kind word. Not one patient moment. Not one act of forgiveness. Everything has been quietly writing a story larger than you imagined. Meanwhile, the person whose heart keeps returning to thoughts of you has been wrestling with emotions they never expected. They tried ignoring them. They tried convincing themselves they were imagining everything. They tried focusing on the relationship they already had. Yet every attempt led them back to the same realization. They were living a version of life that no longer reflected who they wanted to become. That realization frightened them. Ending familiar chapters is never easy. Even when those chapters have already reached their ending. People often stay where they are because certainty feels safer than possibility. But sometimes possibility becomes too beautiful to ignore. That beauty did not begin with romance. It began with respect. Respect became curiosity. Curiosity became admiration. Admiration slowly became hope. And hope is difficult to silence once it takes root. Perhaps this explains why your own heart has recently felt unusually restless. Perhaps you sensed that something invisible was shifting. Perhaps you noticed moments where peace appeared without explanation. Perhaps you felt that an unseen page was quietly turning. Those feelings were not meaningless. Some changes begin long before they become visible. Seeds grow underground before anyone celebrates the harvest. The same is true for life's greatest turning points. What appears sudden to the world has often been growing silently for a very long time. Your story is entering one of those moments. Not because everything will happen overnight, but because truth has already started moving. Truth never rushes. Truth simply continues forward until everyone finally sees what has been there all along. There is still another piece of this story that has not yet been revealed. The discovery about you was only the beginning. What happened immediately afterward surprised even the person experiencing it. The decision that followed was not impulsive. It came after long nights of reflection. Quiet questions. honest conversations with their own heart, and one unforgettable realization that changed everything they believed about love itself. That revelation is still waiting. And when it finally comes into the light, the meaning of every unanswered question from your past may become clearer than ever before. A new truth was beginning to unfold, and the weight of it became impossible for your soulmate to ignore. Every ordinary morning suddenly carried an extraordinary question. Every familiar conversation sounded different. Every plan that once seemed certain now felt uncertain. The more they reflected on what they had discovered about you, the clearer one realization became. They were no longer comparing two people. They were comparing two futures. One future was built on comfort without purpose. The other was built on hope they had never expected to find. They did not make this discovery in a single moment. It happened piece by piece, like the sunrise slowly filling the sky. Every memory they heard about you, every quiet act of kindness connected to your name, every story about your patience, your honesty, and your strength created a picture they could not erase from their heart. They tried convincing themselves that these thoughts would disappear. They buried themselves in work. They distracted themselves with routines. They filled every empty hour with something to do, hoping silence would never catch them. But silence always returned. And whenever it did, the same question echoed through their heart. Why does this person I have never truly known feel more genuine than the life I am already living? That question was not about romance alone. It was about truth. They realized they had spent too much time accepting what was familiar instead of pursuing what was meaningful. That realization changed everything. One evening, they looked at their own reflection longer than usual. It was not because they were searching for flaws. They were searching for honesty. They wanted to know whether they had been fair to themselves and fair to the person beside them. They understood that continuing a relationship without complete sincerity would only create greater disappointment in the future. For the first time in many months, they chose courage over comfort. It was not an easy decision. No important decision ever is. But they knew that pretending everything was fine would only delay the truth. The conversation that followed was filled with respect and kindness. There were no dramatic scenes. There were no harsh words. There was simply honesty. They admitted that something inside them had changed. They explained that discovering the kind of person you were had awakened questions they could no longer ignore. They realized they needed to step away from a relationship that no longer reflected who they wanted to become. It was one of the most difficult choices they had ever made, but it was also the most sincere. They walked away with gratitude for the past and hope for the future, believing that every ending creates space for a beginning that is more genuine. As the days passed, they found themselves thinking about you even more. Not because they expected anything from you, but because your example had quietly inspired them to become a better version of themselves. They admired the strength you showed during difficult seasons. They admired your ability to remain compassionate even when life became complicated. They admired the peace you carried without seeking attention. Those qualities became unforgettable. They realized that real attraction begins with admiration, and admiration grows where authenticity lives. Meanwhile, you continued your own journey without realizing that someone else's life had completely changed because of what they learned about you. You kept moving forward, believing your quiet efforts went unnoticed. You smiled through ordinary days. You helped people without expecting recognition. You stayed faithful to your values when taking shortcuts would have been easier. Every one of those moments became part of a story that reached farther than you could imagine. The greatest influence is often invisible while it is happening. Then something unexpected occurred. Your soulmate came across another story about you. It was simple, almost ordinary, but it confirmed everything they had already begun believing. They heard about a moment when you chose kindness instead of pride. They heard about a time when you encouraged someone who had almost given up. They heard about your willingness to forgive instead of holding on to bitterness. None of these stories were meant to impress anyone. Yet together they formed a picture of someone whose heart remained steady through every season. That picture became impossible to forget. They finally understood that what drew them toward you was not mystery alone. It was consistency. You were the same person when life was easy and when life became difficult. You were the same person whether anyone noticed or not. In a world filled with changing opinions and temporary excitement, your consistency felt rare. It became a quiet light that guided their thoughts toward a different future. From that moment onward, every new day carried a fresh sense of hope. They no longer looked backward with regret. Instead, they began preparing themselves for whatever chapter awaited them next. They wanted to become someone worthy of meeting the person whose example had already changed their heart. They focused on becoming more patient, more honest, more grateful, and more courageous. Without realizing it, your story had already begun transforming theirs. Neither of you knew how close your paths were becoming. Life was arranging small moments behind the scenes. Conversations you never expected were quietly beginning. Opportunities that once seemed unrelated were slowly moving closer together. Tiny details that looked ordinary would soon connect in remarkable ways. Looking back, every delay would eventually make sense. Every unanswered question would become part of a much larger picture. The journey was not finished. In many ways, it had only just begun. Just when it seemed that every important decision had already been made, another unexpected discovery quietly changed the direction of the story. Your soulmate believed they understood why their heart had changed, but they were about to uncover something even more surprising. As they looked deeper into the stories they had heard about you, they noticed one remarkable pattern. Every person who spoke about you described a different moment, yet every story carried the same message. They spoke about your patience. They spoke about your integrity. They spoke about your ability to bring calm into situations where others brought confusion. None of those people knew they were helping shape one of the biggest decisions of someone else's life. They were simply telling the truth as they had experienced it. That realization became impossible to dismiss. Your soulmate understood that a reputation built on genuine actions cannot be created overnight. It is built quietly, one decision at a time, one ordinary day after another. They began asking themselves how someone could remain so consistent even when nobody was watching. The answer they found changed their perspective forever. They realized that true character is not something people perform. It is something they choose every single day, especially when no reward is expected. The more they reflected on that truth, the more they understood why thoughts of you continued returning no matter how hard they tried to focus elsewhere. Days turned into weeks, and instead of fading, their admiration became stronger. They no longer wondered whether ending their previous relationship had been the right decision. They had found peace in choosing honesty over convenience. For the first time in a long while, they woke each morning feeling lighter, as though they had finally stopped carrying a burden they never realized was weighing them down. They were not chasing an impossible fantasy. Instead, they were becoming the kind of person who could build a meaningful future whenever the right opportunity arrived. Meanwhile, your own life continued with its familiar rhythm. You handled responsibilities, encouraged those around you, celebrated small victories, and quietly overcame personal challenges that few people ever noticed. You never imagined that someone, somewhere, was drawing strength simply by learning about the way you lived. Every ordinary choice became another piece of an extraordinary picture. The kindness you offered without expecting recognition continued traveling farther than you could ever see. Sometimes the greatest impact is created by the smallest moments, especially the ones that seem completely ordinary at the time. Then another unexpected moment arrived. A mutual connection mentioned your name during a simple conversation. It was not planned. It was not dramatic. Yet hearing your name again felt different. Instead of curiosity, your soulmate felt certainty. They realized they were no longer wondering who you were. They were wondering whether life would someday allow your paths to cross. They smiled at the thought, not because they expected immediate answers, but because hope had replaced uncertainty. For the first time, the future felt open instead of distant. As they reflected on everything that had happened, they noticed something remarkable. Every event that once appeared unrelated now seemed connected. Every delay had protected them from rushing into the wrong future. Every disappointment had quietly redirected them toward a path they would never have chosen on their own. Looking backward, they saw purpose where they had once seen confusion. That new understanding filled them with gratitude instead of regret. Even painful endings had become meaningful because they created room for something more authentic. There was still one mystery that remained unanswered. Why had all of these discoveries happened now instead of years earlier? The answer slowly became clear. Some truths can only be understood after people have grown enough to appreciate them. If they had learned about you before, they might not have recognized the qualities that now meant everything to them. Growth had prepared them to value authenticity instead of appearances, patience instead of speed, and lasting character instead of temporary excitement. Timing had quietly completed the lesson. Without realizing it, both of your stories were moving closer together. The distance between two lives is not always measured in miles. Sometimes it is measured in readiness. Every challenge you overcame prepared you for the next chapter. Every lesson they learned prepared them for the same destination. Neither journey had been wasted. Every unexpected turn had served a purpose, even when that purpose remained hidden for a long time. The most surprising part of this story had not happened yet. There was still a conversation waiting to unfold, a moment neither of you could predict, and a connection that would make many of the unanswered questions from the past suddenly make sense. Until that moment arrived, both of you continued growing, unaware that each new day was quietly bringing two separate paths closer together. When the time finally came, it would not feel like coincidence. It would feel like every small decision, every quiet act of kindness, every difficult season, and every unexpected ending had been leading to one remarkable beginning all along.